I would like to welcome to the online discussion about the podcast Passed Among Bones and Seeds, a series of audio walking dialogues with the OG Cree Mennonite artist and choreographer Lara Kramer, created by the Black and art critic James Oscar. This conversation explores Kramer's image making and performative explorations spanning from her early photographic exploration of Portage la Prairie and Brandon Indian residential schools to her present billboard project In Blankets, Herds, and Ghosts. In Blankets, Herds, and Ghosts by Lara Kramer is presented by Das Bao in collaboration with MAI, Montréal Art Interculturel, as part of Das Bao Satellite. Before we start this conversation, I would like to acknowledge that the exhibitions and activities of Momenta take place on stolen, unceded territories of the Kanien'kehá:ka nations. These lands and watergates have long served as meeting site for many nations, including Kanien'kehá:ka, the Mohawk, of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabe Algonquin, and are now also the home of the indigenous peoples from across the globe who gather in beautiful ways. Tiohtià:ke Muyang Montréal has a deep colonial history that persists today in many ways. We stand in solidarity with the indigenous nations that have fought the project to protect their sovereignty and the land over the years, and will do our best to dismantle colonial harm where possible. The event today will take in two parts. First, we will listen as the expert that Lara and James pick themselves of the podcast. And then Lara and James will present their work. If you have any questions, you can send them to me towards our chat, and I will be passing them along to the artists at the right time. Before the listening session starts, I would like to tell you some words about the participants. Lara Kramer is an artist of mixed OG Cree and settled heritage, born in London, Canada. Lara lives in Tiohtià:ke Muyang, Montréal, Canada. She is a member of the first generation not to attend the Indian residential schools of Canada. Her practice includes performance, choreography, installation, sound art, video, and visual arts. Her choreography research and fieldwork over the last 12 years have been grounded in intergenerational relationships and knowledge, and her work stands out of the use of deceleration and the close and instinctive listening to the body as form of resistance. James Oscar is an art critic, curator, and researcher in the sociology and anthropology of arts at the Institut National de la Recherche Scientifique. His work explores how the complexity of identities and social forms, human and non-human, are disseminated in visual and performative arts. He is a regular public lecturer at museums, cultural, and academic institutions. His most recent lecture was Exploring Landscape Languages within Urban Simulated and Living Landscapes at the Institute of Australian Geographers Conference in 2021. His latest essay publications appear in the book Rashid Johnson, Anxious Audience, Power Plant 2021. His following publications serve as the current work of Vrajni Pereira and Neb Sidhu. He was a curatorial consultant for the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, From Africa to the Americas, Face-to-Face Picasso, Past and Present. Lara and James, is there anything you would like to add before we start the audio?
No, I think that's great. Welcome. We'll get a chance to dive in shortly.
Amazing. For you, James? I think you are muted, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you for that introduction. I also just want to maybe just add that I think we need to start thinking about the territories we're in as the Americas and think about this whole spirit of what the Americas mean: fire, water, and all these other things that people like Eduardo Galeano speak about. And I'm right now in Mexico, where I am actually pursuing this study of the Americas and of the living in simulated landscapes.
Thank you very much, Lara. Thank you very much, James. So without further ado, let's listen to an excerpt of the podcast Passed Among Bones and Seeds.
could feel under the photos?
Yeah, I think that I appreciate that framing, because I think a lot of my approach to my choreographic work, the physical practice, and then of course the presenting of that practice is always approaching that value and belief that there's that deeper experience beyond the physical, right?
It feels like there's an X-ray, like underneath there's something else. And I see it in your choreography often. When you're dancing on a surface in your last piece called Them Voices, you know, yes, you were dancing on a surface, right?
Yeah.
But we all are seeing or thinking we're seeing something underneath, which is a scaffolding. And, you know, I always talk about the scene of the crime.
Yeah.
I feel like there's scaffolding. The scene of the crime is underneath those photos.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, it you know, it's very much, you know, being at Brandon Residential School with the derbies, the parts of the building left, and a certain feeling of decay is there was still so much life there, voices and spirits, and I think that feeling of there's more beyond just the structure, what's left of the structure there.
More beyond the photograph we're seeing.
Absolutely.
There's something underneath it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and you could feel it beyond the physical, you know. It was a really charged historical site, you know. That's, yeah, I don't know its current state at this moment, but at that time, I think those photos really were charged. They were really full of a multitude of energies, voices.
And you know, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, and I'm just going to kind of quote some of the things you had said about the photographs at Brandon and of course at Portage also, because there's pictures that you didn't take, but there's a picture of some kids in the museum, the quote-unquote museum of that residential school. So some of the things you said in the past were taking in these visual landscapes. The photos needed to act as a tool towards my choreography, a way of evoking memory. They are flat but charged. So you just said that, they're charged. But then you talk about these, there's a few artifacts still. One of them was the beds, the straps. You also spoke about the layers of opposing feeling like there's like a fuck you, like there's a side of being against erasure. Do you remember any of this? Again, these ghosts that are there, that you saw, that you took photographs of just something on the surface, but almost like those artifacts that we're looking at, they are charged with this memory and with this thing. You spoke about hearing voices, walking outdoors amongst these bricks and rubbish. You said inside a decay, it's not dead, broken, it's evoked a stranger presence. And the scaffolding as a way of thinking, and as a way of thinking of the photograph, but certainly it's almost like you saw a primordial landscape. Like it's like that landscape, which is that scene of the crime. So which includes the human and non-human presences.
Yeah, well, I think that journey, like I said, it really started with this presence of I mean, we're talking 13 years ago, so the conversation, you know, we hadn't had the Truth and Reconciliation yet in Canada, which, you know, I'm not going to speak from a, you know, political, critical point of view or give my opinion about what that was or what it means to me, but that I do know it did bring certain issues a little more into the consciousness of settler Canada, and then of course more recently with the graves. But you know, we're talking, I guess that experience, I don't know if I named it at the time, but I knew my body, my physical body needed to visit these sites. It was courageous that my mother was able to come with me and be there, you know, but there was also a large presence of other people survivors who joined and just sharing and being in relation with us, which also added to the journey. And I think at the time, when you grow up knowing about a history that has been so deeply, hidden, it does something to you, and it does something to you when you're brought up knowing the atrocities of what a parent has gone through, but it's like no one, outside of those experiences is aware. They're just completely ignorant to it. So that was, I think a big part of my I want to say like direction was, making sure that you're getting swarmed by the bees.
Big part
I guess
of it.
making sure that my experience in really listening to my mothers and just, a lot was through storytelling, through her sharing quite a bit, but then actually being there in the actual pulsing memory of it was important. I think anyone staying on Turtle Island as a guest should be doing the same thing. Should have already done the same thing, but it's going back to what you said, like for sure it was like visiting a scene of a crime, and there's
like crime. They're almost like crime scene photos, in some ways. Just seeing the bits of the rock, and you can feel there was a crime there when you look at the photos. Mm-hmm. It's not just like a construction site or like a demolished building. I felt like there were non-human presences there. In fact, you had said at one point that a deer passed by at one point. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that? Deer?
Yeah, there was, when we were there so we're talking about the demolished residential school of Brandon. When we walked in there, it took us a while even to find it, because my mom's recall, I don't think she had been back. I don't think we had been back since, late 80s. Mm. So there had been a lapse of time since we had been back, and I think, you're just going off of memory, of where it's located. So I remember driving, and she was sort of directing, and then of course the building wasn't standing anymore. So when we arrived, it was also like the rediscovering of an experience with also this other loaded amount of history that's happened in the last, I guess it would almost have been a couple decades. Yeah, it was almost 2 decades there. Yeah, I think early on that was an intention. It was to make presence my voice and the stories that are carried with the legacy of my family. Mm. And having, I think at one point it felt important, really important, that these stories were going to be, have more of a presence and a platform. Initially it was like in the contemporary dance world, nationally and internationally, having these stories spoken about. But, well, I think at a certain point it was just very selective conversations, and in some ways you can still say it's very selective. You see that there's moments where there's a momentum, that the conversation of our colonial Canadian history is spoken about, and then there's of course a lot of settler guilds that will come up, and that always seems to take quite a bit of space, and then it just doesn't, it sort of dies down, and it's like that level of that hum of sleep, like that feeling of
hum of sleep.
Yeah, it's like there's moments where it seems like people are a bit more woke, or the climate, the atmosphere is a little more woke, and there's like people, I'm talking about settlers, are sort of in a disbelief that this could have ever happened, yet there's not that relief of the experience where, those directly impacted by it can check themselves out and be like, oh, I don't want to think about this anymore. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's that was a little bit that urgency early on. Is I was like, well, this is something that's been embodied, not just my mother, but my grandmother, a multitude of cousins, family members. You know, if we're talking about recent travels to where my grandmother's from, her territory, Black Soul First Nation Treaty 3 territory. I mean, I'm in relation to survivors every day there with family. And so I can't really speak at this moment today, maybe where my direction is in this moment of, you know, I know what's changed over the years as far as maybe what drives me or what feels important and how that's changed or transformed. But I do think, you know, when you're bringing up that idea of seeing the scaffolding of the experience, I think that's, you know, so much of the work of you know, the creation of living landscapes, whether it be live performance or in relation to video or photographic stills, there's always, you know, it's like my interior is always with me and is always a part of the narrative or part of that expression or non-expression, you know, however it's laid out. It's yeah.
And when I think about that, because obviously I've been tracking your work for a few years, and I definitely see some what I call landscape languages that you keep developing. And one of them is this notion of deceleration, of slowness. And I feel like when I look at these photographs, they have the same approach of this deceleration and the slowness. I would call it like slow photography. And you just did a video for
with Elizabeth Powell, Land of Talk.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, does that evoke anything for you when I talk about, make this comparison between your practice, whether it's image making or the dance? There's always this slowness, this deceleration. Why is that important? Will that help other people to understand, or why do you take that approach? And do you see what I'm talking about?
Yes, of course. I think that the approach or the intention of deceleration or working with, you know, I would say a certain amount of energy or material or whether it's, you know, articulated through sound, the physical body. I think you know, so much of it has to go back to the self with pacing, you know, and I think that the importance of that for me and you know, I think at times it's always taken on different maybe nuanced meaning. Sometimes it just felt so necessary, because if I'm, you know, why do X, Y, Z when really all I need to do is just X and sit there and be with it and really
be in the moment and soak in it.
Well, yeah, soak in it and let it. There's a level of it. You know, I don't want to say meditation in the way of that. It leads to any kind of deep enlightenment, but that or anything like that. It's really sort of like allowing something to take a further amount of time than maybe what is the occurrence that's like swarming around you in this
in the fast-paced world we're in.
Well, yeah, I'm talking a little bit more about this like urban environment, and you know, and it's, I think that value of allowing something to take its time,
whether it's a photograph
and then
or dancing, I guess, everything.
Yeah, to sit with it.
Create work like that, I mean, yeah.
Well, in the creation of those works, I think there's that intention of like, this needs to be given further time. And I of course, you know, I say it goes back in relation to a sensibility of pacing, and I think it's like I'm having to ask myself, like, has it been long enough? Is this enough? Is this enough? And it's not enough, and it's often I need it to be, be extended beyond maybe what is, I'd say, popular, or like even allowing it to fall to a point where you start to feel that discomfort or a boredom, or that feeling of, I need to move beyond this now because it's been stated. And it's like, yeah, but it's not enough for something to just be stated and named, It's like we have to, the further in relation to it we are, the more that, it's like that building of a certain connective tissue, whether it's with our senses, our emotions, our spirit, we are then now inviting in a deeper relation,
So there's a kind of, I guess one of the interests is a relationality when you're creating, whether it's, because even with the older photographs, and we're going to get into the one in the old port soon, but with the older photographs, my feeling when I'm looking at it is I have no choice but to feel a kind of relationality. It's just, it's a flat image, but it's not. There's something that gets you, because it's almost like there's there. In that nothing, like...
Loaded.
That's it.
And that nothing is so loaded, so that I'm thinking of that photo. The photo cup, there's two where I find that that's really provoked. Is there's that one where it's there's that beam. I think you were going to talk about
the
that
plank,
one, the plank, and it's part of a structural part of the building, and it looks like it could go into sort of like that's the end, It's like the collapse building. That's the residue, and it's not nothing, but unless you. There's sort of an infinite feeling of, because I think that beam goes close to the skyline, so there's that feeling of, a continuation, and it's not falling short of it just being, rubbish for rubbish sake, there's that feeling of something is continuous, and it is, it's...
The story goes on even today, unfortunately. I mean, when I looked at it, I saw that, like, walking the plank into what it does not seem like it's a void you're walking into. It feels like something generative that has come out of this ruin. Like it's still there. It's proof. Like that photograph you took is still like this proof.
Yeah.
Even like we see often in your performances where you might lay still somewhere and give the audience time to soak with this, again, evidence of the scene of the crime.
Yeah.
And another one is this thinking about the boys, the girls, the violent discipline they went on in these schools, and all you have left is that you take this photograph, all you have left is that plank, as evidence. It's a plank that you could walk along, dance along, jump along.
So thank you very much for staying with us and listening. That will conclude our listening part. There's a couple of questions from the audience. If you have any questions, keep sending it to us. But in the meantime, I would like to give the speech to Lara and James so that they can tell us a little bit about what we just heard and perhaps carry on the conversation and spark some questions among the listeners. So Lara, James.
Thank you. Welcome. I'll just take a moment here and wait for James. I can just start maybe with my introduction. I'm just going to introduce myself. Ani bonjour, Lara Kramer in Adishnakas, Minwa, Minido no Zawin, Wasno de Nimikwe, Endau. London Adonjaba, so London, Ontario, that's where I was born, and Jojage, Montreal, Nadinda, that's where I'm living. Wabjaji, Dodom, Martin Clan. So thank you very much for joining us today.
So yeah, thanks for that, Jessica. And I guess I would start with, I mean, the thing that really abounds and comes through a lot of what was said there is this idea of embodiment. And you speak, Lara, about the fact that you can't just wake up and forget the feelings that you have in the body, right? Whereas other people can just turn off and continue their daily life, right? And I think that's the whole kind of point for me of the work you do, and work which has skilled vision. Skilled vision is a kind of work that has, as I said at the beginning, it is proactive engagement with the world. It's a social activity in a sense. It's not political. So can you speak about this, about these two extremes? I think that in one sense, you are activating this space where you're hoping that people can not just shed away what they're hiding from all the time. And then at the same time, it's part of you. It's always part of you. Could you speak a little bit about that thing that's always with you, and maybe even the frustration or what you think you can evoke by doing this kind of work, which is not direct political work. It's effective. It's an effective space.
Okay, I might have you interject a little here because, yeah, so the two questions being referring back to that notion of the not being able to turn off. I mean, I think that is, I mean, for me, that's an obvious thing. But I guess when I, while we were talking through that series of photos and going back, almost 13 years ago to those early black and white photos, I was really putting myself back into the climate of what was happening across Canada at the time. And I think that there were these like momentary, I want to say it's like it almost feels like these little erosions that would come, and there would be these, remarks, I'd hear like that this could have never happened, and that denial, right? So I suppose what maybe my early, if you want to name it as a frustration, but I think it was like an urgency, was that this isn't just sort of a passing by media clip or news story that somehow is going to cause some ripple or ineffective change. That I felt that having this, having been on this path of being able to create live images and have a public, I felt it was necessary that the work needed to really be rooted in this like deep relationality, and that to kind of create a deeper resonance, that there is resonance after being in relation to the live work. And I think that just, I don't know if I answered your first part of the question, but
it's not, it is kind of an answer. I mean, my interest is because I think for a lot of people it's interesting, because a lot of the stuff you usually go see has become almost entertainment or spectacle. And people like myself and other multidisciplinary artists are creating effective spaces where people can come in, and they're not told about Indigenous schools. They're there to feel it. So that's, and I think you're bringing that in. Do you think that's true, or?
Yes, for sure. I mean,
yeah.
Yes. When you mentioned the effective space, I mean, that makes me really think about the work I did that bordered on both sort of installation performance with Phantom, and so much of that was, sort of stirring that sort of what you called the effective space, so that there could be, this one I felt I was trying to offer further accessibility, so it being not in a standard theater, but that the work could be re-engaged with as much as one would want to, but to also have that immersive experience. And so again, opening up that felt space, that space that can be nuanced. And I think that is, when we're talking about the context of this history, it's like, I think there is a need for those nuanced conversations, because otherwise, one might fall to apathy, or it just becomes a little bit easy to disengage with it if it's not something that's it doesn't have a relationality quality to it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I might even just like sort of to get into the second part is, and I mean, it's almost like this like sort of phenomenological, psychological space. So there's these little erosions. You speak about your story, but nobody believes you. There's this gaslighting, and then people jump on board and then they're believing. So it almost, at one point in history, they're talking about Indigenous life, and then it disappears again. What's that space? I've never asked you, what's that space like for you where you're consistently being told at some points that, no, this did not happen. And then you're saying, no, it did happen. And you're living in this in-between space of the reality your family's gone through in residential schools, and then the art that you're trying to make, which is to evoke that story. What is that space like? What is that space? Because it seems almost like a space of madness in some ways. Or is it generative? Is that the generative space?
I mean, I think it is in ways generative. I think, I'm sure I've had a different experience to it over the years. I think in more recent times, I've come to just really recognize that, like, my sense of well-being, or my sense of that groundedness, anchoredness with my work isn't at all dependent upon what is going on as far as the narrative in settler state Canada, because otherwise, yes, I would feel bonkers, right? It's like, I mean, this is, how would I say? I mean, I'm just giving a really recent example, and it's actually outside of the context of the arts, but it was, my daughter and I were invited to speak at Orange Shirt Day at her school, and we did it a little prior to just help with the education, and it was really wonderful, and it was like graciously welcomed and supported by her teacher in particular. And then it's sort of interesting how, like, the next week, one of the parents is sending me photos of like racist historical history books that the school has. So, it's always in that, would you say it, like that, there's movement forward, but there's still this like, there's still deeper work to be done, and I, hearing that what was echoed in the podcast, for me it was, yeah, sure, I can say it's no longer enough to just to name it. What is the action? What is the movement? And I don't think, I really, like I said, I think I'm not in a place where I want to be. Like my sense of it being there being progress isn't dependent upon this larger narrative, because I think otherwise it's too troubling, So I think it's finding these niches and areas and the relationships that I have to really feel like that we are in a place of, making, whether it's even meaningful, smaller changes and exchanges.
Okay. Just, do you want us to take an audience question? Maybe we can, is there something related to this at least, maybe that could?
Yes, of course. Well, I have this question here. It says, with the current situation of awareness in the territory and at an international level, would you consider we continue in that hum of sleep? So I remember you talk about a hum of sleep at some point. Where are these treaties of leading us to according to you? Or better said, how is the landscape forming according to you and through your choreographic and image making practice? Like, what are the steps and what are the dances that you see us being able to dance in the future?
Can you post that beautiful question so we can all see it? In the chat, please. It's such a beautiful, the end is so poetic. Sorry, I know Lara wants to respond. I just want to see it.
No, it'd be visual, be nice, because it'd be nice to hear it again. It's a large question.
You could read it again also.
Question. You could read it again.
I'd love to hear the person. I'd love to hear the person who wrote it read it. It's beautiful.
I guess Mo.
Donc tu vas la relire, Jess? We can't hear you. We can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
So I posted the first part, which says, with the current situation of awareness in the territory and at an international level, would you consider we continue in that hum of sleep? And I'm going to let you answer this and while I put the second part of it, because I think that way we unpack it.
That's Lara first.
There's the question, would you consider we like continue in that hum of sleep? Meaning, is that how I guess I need clarity in that question. Is the question asking, do I consider that even with all this awareness, all this is how I'm interpreting it, with all the what's come out of the news, do I still consider the atmosphere still in this bit of a dormant sleep?
Maybe you want to just answer it like that? Maybe?
So
okay, that
the
was
person,
my assumption.
The person that wrote it can like speak up, or if you feel more comfortable, you can send send the answer, whether it's to me or to Lara, to James.
Yes.
If this doesn't happen, like you can carry on, maybe explaining what you interpret from that, and if at any moment someone wants to like come forward, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to try it or?
Yes, sorry, I wasn't clear on the question. So, I mean, do I consider sure, in lots of ways, I still think that there's, that there hasn't been this, I do think there has been a level of awareness that has come, and maybe the change is very slow. It's like that slowness of like a large iceberg melting. But do I think that there's still that level of like a hum of sleep, like where there's a resistance to deal? I do. I mean, I still do think that, and I don't think it's I mean, I could give reasons why I feel that and see that, and there's many examples of that, but I think that it's that's just about all I'll say.
Can I chime in for a minute?
Yes.
So, I mean, definitely it's a question more for Lara, but I think also as a Black man who, is living in a time where there's been this woke awareness about the world and about racism, I think one of the things I like to look at is not the increasing or the continuing hum of sleep. I like to look at what artists are doing as an example of the context that they're in. So somebody like Lara and other artists like Dana Michelle, Clara Fury, if you notice a lot of what their practice is, it's almost like a whispering to people in their sleep. You know what I mean? So I think we're still sleeping. And I think when you see artists working at that level, which is almost like it's nuanced, it's intimate, it's literally almost like a whisper in the air. I think it tells you we're still sleeping. Do you know what I'm saying? Because artists are naturally, certain artists are naturally very gifted to understand that the way they're going to get things across to people is according to what the context is. So I think the continuing context is this hum of sleep. And I think artists, like specifically like Lara, in a way she understands that. And I think, you know, when I look at the photographs, again, there's that scaffolding, but it seems like there's whispers. And I think whispering is something you do when somebody is still sleeping. Just a crazy idea I'm putting out there.
That's another interpretation to the question too, or just going off this notion of hum of sleep. I mean, I think when I look at this, the following up of the question of, you know, just referring to the truth and reconciliation and where this leading us. I mean, you know, that's another I want to say occurrence in our recent history where we see this drive, there's a levity, there's momentum of action and change, and then it's sort of it's not really enacted, or it's not really taken to affect policy change or affects any kind of paradigm shift. And that's what I'm referring to, that hum of sleep, is we're just want to be and I'm talking about settler state Canada wants to maintain the status quo, right? And that's that larger sleep. Or you know, when we think about what's happened earlier this year with the investigation into graves, like I mean, you know, one thing my mother said is, she says, well, we've always known. And you think about the amount of schools across Turtle Island, you know, where's the further inquiry? Where's the further, where's the deeper consideration for moving forward with this, you know, here specifically where we're situated, but also across the board, you know, because there's not just the few schools that have come up, there's plenty. And that's what I think, there's always this feeling of being on the cusp of something more profound, and then it's just yeah, that desire to kind of maintain the power structure as is what is in place. So that's challenging, but I don't have yeah, I know your question was also a bit more intricate too, going into how's this forming, according and through your choreographic and image making practice. Yeah, I appreciate your question here. I don't know if I have an answer for it, so to say. I mean, I think that so much of my more recent work, it's like I'm really thinking about this. I feel like I'm in this place of privilege, being able to work and be in relationship to my mother and children, and how that is such like a through line of, I want to say, holding a certain space for making way for the future, right? It's like that's the very thing that was severed generationally, right, through the residential school system and that displacement. So being able to, yeah, have that, you know, I want to say, it's like it wasn't a relationship that necessarily was a given, right? There was a lot of I want to say, you know, attempts and forms of, I want to say, violence that occurred through my mother's lifetime that made it challenging to be in relation with her children. And I think that to me is something of, yeah, I think of that, and that's sort of where, yeah, how I show up today, maybe, and speaking about making way into the futures is thinking about, you know, that kinship and those generational traces and mappings.
Oh, that's beautiful. Can I chime in? I just wanted to, if I could, is that okay, Lara, if I add? Okay. So I think, am I on, or, yeah. So I think I'm just gonna, because I'm loving what Lara's saying. And I think one of the things with the end of that question is, and I mean, of course, I'm not the choreographer, but I am somebody who writes about dance and performance and also visual arts. And one of the things that, whether it's visual arts or whether it's performance, and whatever the context is, there's always the body. The body remains. And the body remains as a testament of what's going on, you know? And I think work like Lara, whether it's the photos in the old port, which are almost like shamanic photos in some way, or the other photos where there's one photo of her mom is like in the distance, it's these ghostly photos. What's always there is the body, whether you see it or not. And the body always remains as a testament of the time we're in. So I think if I was gonna pretend to be Lara and answer this question about choreographic, about, you know, how is the landscape forming according to you and through your choreographic and imaging practice, what are the steps and the dances? I mean, I would just say what I'm seeing as somebody who writes about the work is, I think that there's intimacy in the body. And I think we have to insist on intimacy. And that's, if Lara's latest piece, which is called Them Voices, it's such an insistent, it's almost like a manifesto for intimacy. And I mean, for God's sake, the time we're in with this continuing, never-ending confinement, there's never been a time more for artists to insist on this intimacy, and I'm seeing it a lot. The other thing I think that's coming up in the future and that's continuing is nuanced conversations, like what Lara brought up. And also what she said, another thing that I think is a continuation in the future, and, you know, as the answers, it says the steps and dances that are the future is also, you know, not being part of the narrative, you know, and constructing new languages, like how Lara insists on slowing things down, whether it's a slow photography, slow dance, slow installation, you know, insisting on those languages. Deceleration. And then another kind of language that is important in her work is this language of serendipity, right? And I think that's such an important language, especially in the moment we're in, where we're told to be programmed, follow, be confined. Artists like Lara are insisting that the future of these dances of our everyday life has to be serendipity. We can't give it up. We can't give up intimacy, and we have to live outside the normative. So that's what I'm adding.
Is there another question that we should be taking before we go?
Well, thank you very much, Lara. Thank you, James. There is one more question. We have 8 minutes until the end of our listening, but I think it's a nice way to wrap it up, because it's actually a question that I have about, you talk about slow photography and living landscapes, and I wanted you to maybe conclude this question with telling us a little bit more about this deceleration. Would you consider it as a strategy for connection, for archiving, for healing? Like, where are we going? How can we conclude this listening session? How can we conclude what we just experienced together and the way we are about to digest your work within the next couple of days? Yeah, so tell us a little bit about this deceleration. Where is it going within your work, your performance, your vision?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think the tool of working with this longevity of pacing or deceleration, you know, I think early in my career, I started using it in a way to and the simplest form is to take time with the images that were being embodied and living, and really to open up what James referred to as that felt space, so that I wasn't necessarily bringing public into a situation where they had to, you know, hear what the conclusion is, or hear what one specific sort of narrative, but that to sit long enough that it provokes, you know, a further engagement, like room in that space for their own lived experience to come in relationship to what's being proposed. That there's that time to kind of go inside of there if I'm being clear. And I think the importance around that is just, I think that's where we can, I mean, I say deceleration, but by no means is it, you know, lacking any kind of like vibrancy or dynamic or sense of it being, you know, loaded with you know, many layers. And I think that taking of time, it is a tool to also get public to kind of tune in for themselves, to kind of get everyone sort of really zoned in, so that they have access to those, yeah, what we've talked before about those micro, macro moments and images that they have. It creates an availability, I feel. So, yeah, did you want to add anything, James, to that?
Definitely, you know, when you talk about the archive, I think I'm always a bit wary of talking about archives, because that's what got us in trouble in the first place, the colonial archive. I think right now, I think we want to stay away from building new archives. I think we also need to also consider this notion of healing and how it's being talked about, and this notion of care, which is being talked a lot about in festivals and in books, etc. I think instead of healing and care, I think the word I would use is consideration, like considering, you know, considering. And to me, that's sort of what comes out of deceleration, because I can tell you right now that when I look at Lara's work, it actually helps my breathing. It actually teaches me new ways to consider. It actually sediments me. And, you know, this breathing, because a lot of people do yoga, they do this and that, but this whole thing about this deceleration that Lara is sort of after, and even with the slow photography, is that we're there, but at once we're slowing things down, but we're not disappearing into it. That slowing down and that deceleration needs to be a place where we actually meet other people. Because that's one of the dangers that I think, especially with COVID and confinement, is that people are slowing things down, but they're slowing things down so much that I think sometimes they're disappearing into a hole. But when you look at this performance and the photography that Lara is proposing, this is a place I think where people can meet. I think it's a place where we stay active and we're not dormant, you know. I'll quote my mentor, Edouard Glissant. He says, là où les océans se rencontrent, that there where the oceans meet themselves. So I think that to me is the important part about deceleration, that it's a point of the relationship, of relationality, of not just opening up felt space for one person, but of reminding us that we don't live in this world alone, and that if we slow things down, yes, we can find ourselves, take ourselves apart, but ultimately, the goal really is to get back and to get into our relations, as the Indigenous people often talk about.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Lara. And thank you everyone that has been listening. I just want to remind you, worry not, we will be sending all the participants an email thanking you, as well as the link to our SoundCloud for the entire listening of the podcast. And also this session that was recorded will be available on our Momenta YouTube channel in the near future. I want to thank you both for bringing this project with us through the end and for sharing with us this extremely rich content. Thank you, Lara. Thank you, James.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Everyone joining.
My pleasure. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.